Hello students. In the previous lecture, we discussed about the scope of international relations. In this lecture, we will discuss a new topic called the level of analysis, a good understanding of which is a must for the student of international relations. This is because of two important reasons. First, it is helpful to think about different things that affect international relations by breaking them down into different level of analysis. It also acts as the building blocks for any systematic analysis or answering rigorous research questions that may pertain to your area of research. We will study the level of analysis in international relations in two parts. In the first part, we will discuss the meaning and importance of the level of analysis. Then we will look at the background. Then we will discuss the contributions of prominent international relations scholars like Kenneth Waltz, David Singer, Merton Kaplan, Barry Wujan and Ole Weaver. Then we will end our discussion with certain concluding remarks. In the second part, we will have a detailed discussion on the four levels of analysis such as the individual, domestic, regional and systemic level of analysis. So let us start our discussion with the meaning and importance of the level of analysis. The level of analysis refers to different levels at which one can study or analyze global politics. Hence, it is considered as a methodological tool to study international relations. International system consists of states, organizations, societies or individuals, which we have already discussed. An observer may choose to focus on the whole international system or parts of the system or some few states of the system. What forms the parts or components of the system is again a matter of perspective. The realist focus on the state level of analysis, while the neo-realist on the systemic level and the liberals focus on the individual level of analysis. There is a need for such a device because of the vast number of themes, actors and issues in international relations that can become sometimes overwhelming. There are also material constraints like the availability of time, the availability of material, or sometimes you have to do the research within the limit of certain pages or word count. Making a conscious decision about the actors is a problem that helps to identify the most appropriate level of analysis. So, once you agree with the kind of actors you are going to study, so that will help you to choose the most appropriate level of analysis. Second, recognizing the environment that condition actors' behavior refines the selection of the level of analysis. So, how the environment, how the global system, how the domestic factors or the individual level analysis is important for you, that can be decided by the environmental condition that affect the behavior of the actors. Finally, it guides the determination of appropriate theoretical tools, whether you prefer the realist school, you prefer the neo-realist school, you prefer the liberal approach, you prefer the constructionism. So, all these kind of theoretical approaches are to be decided on the level of analysis you prefer to focus. Let us now start about the background of this level of analysis. The result of behavioral movement during 1950s, which applied methodology of natural sciences in social science, greatly affected or greatly influenced the level of analysis in international relations. Before the behavioral revolution in political science and subsequently in international relations, traditional approaches were the dominant kind of approaches that focused on the intuition, experience and textual interpretation. So, before the behavioral revolution, we had this traditional approach before the Second World War. Kenneth Waltz's famous book, The Man, State and War in 1959 proved useful to to think about different levels of analysis: individual, domestic and systemic. Different levels of analysis illuminate different reasons for why countries go to war, sign international treaties or sometimes pursue military alliances. The works of Kenneth Waltz, Kaplan, David Singer and Barry Bujan and Ole Weber had major contributions in the area of level of analysis in international relations. Now, let me focus on the contribution of prominent international relations scholars, starting with Kenneth Waltz. Waltz introduced three aspects: human nature, the nature of states and the nature of the international system as the primary reasons for war. He called these three levels of analysis as three images. The first image represented human nature, the second was based on the state level and the third was about the quality of the anarchical state system. He stressed the significance of the third image as the major reason for the causes of war in international politics. He was of course not the first to think about this three level of analysis. C.A.W. Manning made a reference to these three levels of analysis in his work in 1942. But Waltz's rigorous and systematic analytical approach made his work a prominent example of the realist school of international relations. So, before Waltz, the level of analysis was used by Manning, but the kind of rigorous work Kenneth Waltz did for explaining the causes of war in international politics made his work one of the most prominent work in the level of analysis and also a prominent work in the realist school of international relations. Let us now focus on the contribution of David Singer. Singer provided classic treatment to this issue in his work The Level of Analysis Problem in International Relations, which was published in the year 1961. He introduced two levels of analysis, the international system and the national subsystem, or what you can say the state system. International system is the most comprehensive level of analysis and strongest, if not the only determinant of foreign policy decision. So, for Singer, if you want to really understand the working of a country's foreign policy, you have to focus on the international system, because that explains the kind of pressures, the kind of stress the nations are undergoing and how they are responding to this stress, how they are responding to these shocks, how they are responding to these issues through their foreign policy approaches. The systemic approach emphasized generality of actors' behavior, but national level of analysis insisted on specific sets of goals the nations follows. So, when you want to know the general factors, so you have to focus on the systemic level, and if you want to understand the individual foreign policy of a particular country, then the state level analysis would be a better option. But analysis on systemic level exaggerates the impacts of the system upon the national actors, and conversely it reduces the impact of the actors on the system. So, if you just focus on the systemic analysis, it may not be helpful to tell you everything about how the states formulate the foreign policy, what are the reaction of the states to a particular international event, but the problem is sometimes it is exaggerated because it does not take into account all the factors. At the national level, internal and external factors of the behavior are distinguished, and therefore, the effects are different from systemic level. So, when the nations make any foreign policy, they make a distinction between the domestic factors and international factors, and that is the reason why the effects of their foreign policy or the effects of internal system on their foreign policy would be different. The systemic level provides a more comprehensive picture. He argues that the subsystemic or the actor oriented system is more fruitful because of its great details. So, sometimes you focus on the systemic factor, but sometimes if you think also about the state level analysis, that also explains a kind of more details you can get. For example, if you just focus on the role of systemic factors for the dissolution of the Soviet Union or the disintegration of Soviet Union. That may not be the reason or that may be the sole reason, but if you focus on the economic factor or the internal economic factor that influenced the disintegration of Soviet Union, that will also be important to know its collapse. So, both internal factors and external factors are important for understanding a state's behavior. So, both level of analysis offer a similar degree of prediction. So, if you combine the state element with the international system, or if you combine the state level analysis or the systemic level of analysis, that would to some extent give you a kind of better picture. Now, let me talk about the contribution of Merton Kaplan. Kaplan's book System and the Processes in International Politics, which he published in the year 1957, introduced pattern of power distribution which explained the behavior of states in the international system. So, basically for Merton Kaplan, the way power distribution is made in the international system is the major reason for how the states behave in a particular way or not behave in a particular way. He looks at the dynamics within the system and its influence over other systems. So, what dynamics are there in the international system that is more important than its influence over the other systems. He used systems approach to understand a phenomena in international politics by examining the function of the international system instead of analyzing the developments happening in its element. Merton Kaplan makes a clear distinction between the domestic politics and international politics, and he is of the view that domestic politics has no role in international politics, when he says that its level of analysis basically takes into account the function of the international system, rather what is happening within the state, that is not very important in his level of analysis. He introduced 6 models of international system that are all unit based analysis, and characteristics of the system are decided by the prevailing units. So, basically he tries to explain how the international politics operates at the systemic level by using the unit level analysis, and basically how all kind of activities can be decided or can be influenced, can be understood on the basis of those 6 model analysis. It gave us a useful framework not only in which international history can be studied, but also the future developments may be projected. So, when you focus on the systemic analysis of Merton Kaplan, so that is not only telling us how history can be studied through his unit of analysis, it also tells us a lot about the future of the working of the international system. So, in that way Merton Kaplan contributions to the systemic analysis of international politics is of great help to the researchers, to the scholars of international relations. Now, let me focus on Barry Bourgeon and Ole Weber, who are studying and adding a new dimension to the level of analysis. Both these scholars used a new concept called complex security, and they particularly show how these 3 levels of analysis are not enough to explain the post Cold War period. They introduce a new concept called regional level of security as a prominent tool, what we can call as the regional level of analysis for better explanation of the phenomena in international politics. So, we have studied about the individual level of analysis, we have discussed about the domestic factor as a level of analysis or the state level of analysis, what you can say. Then we have discussed about the systemic level of analysis, but Barry Bourgeon and Weber, they are talking about a new level of analysis that you can call as regional level of analysis. The main idea is that the local powers have more room for maneuvering due to the end of bipolarity and lack of superpower rivalry. So, these were the factors that was constraining the behavior of regional actors, and because there was a lack of bipolarity and there was also the lack of superpower rivalry. So, the local powers or the local regional powers they were getting more room, more freedom for their foreign policy decisions. They argued that the sole superpower, that is the United States, and other great powers like China, European Union, Japan and Russia are not willing to intervene in security affairs outside their own regions because their domestic capabilities are not enough to engage militarily and undertake strategic competition in critical parts of the world. So, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the America was the sole superpower, and these regional powers like China, like Japan, like Russia, or for that matter any regional power, they were busy in consolidating their power. So, they had no time to intervene in the regional issues of other powers. Particularly you can take the example of China. China was busy immediately after the end of the Cold War period, and that was the reason why it was keeping itself distantly from the affairs of the South Asian politics, except maybe perhaps Pakistan. So, that explains that in the end of the superpower rivalry and the end of the Cold War, and also the end of the bipolarity, that in its economic development China was busy in consolidating its power. So, it was not pursuing a very active kind of policy that provided a kind of opportunity to the regional powers to focus on their issues, and they were not concerned what is happening, what was happening in other parts of the world. So, now the regional powers, they have no alternative but to leave local powers to deal with military and strategic issues within their own regions. So, basically if you look at this analysis, you will find that the local powers, they were not disturbed to some extent by the regional powers. So, they were basically talking of the superpower, the regional powers and the local powers, and the local powers were not affected in their respective regions, or they were not interrupted in their own respective regions because of preoccupation of the sole superpower in other issues, because the regional powers, they had no military capability and to intervene in other regions. They were also engaged in consolidating their own power in their own region, particularly as I said China in case of Southeast Asia, and because of that reason the local powers, they were enjoying some sort of autonomy in their respective regions or geographical territories. So, that explains that how the role of local powers can be understood, how the operation of local international politics can be understood by applying this regional level of analysis. Let us summarize what we have discussed so far. We discussed that international system consists of states, international organizations, civil society organizations, societies and prominent individuals, and what parts or components you choose is a matter of your research perspective. Different levels of analysis illuminate different reasons for why countries go to war, sign international treaties or pursue alliances with other like-minded countries. We also discussed major contributions of prominent IR scholars like Kenneth Waltz, Kaplan, David Singer, Barry Wujan and Ole Weber to the international relations methodology through their level of analysis. During our earlier discussion on the nature of international relations, we discussed that similar method of knowledge production was one of the most important reasons why many scholars did not consider international relations as a separate academic discipline. These scholars mainly focused on 4 levels of analysis: individual, domestic, regional and systemic. It is interesting to mention that while majority of international relations scholars fit into one of the 4 categories of analysis, Marxism, a different theory, places class as the category that underlies all political connections rather than relying solely on the individual, state, regional or systemic level of analysis. So, in that sense, Marxism does not accept the 4 level of analysis we have discussed in the context of we have discussed earlier. In other words, according to the Marxist perspective, individual, state and international decisions are motivated by and based on class relations. Each level of analysis will be covered in detail in our next lecture. Till then, goodbye. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.